Good morning. Welcome to my Facebook and YouTube Live for Tuesday. Pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much for joining me excuse me, pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much for joining me this morning. You know, I have a number of thoughts sort of echoing in my brain cavity that I wanted to talk about. I think today I'm just going to talk about mornings because I find mornings super challenging, and I want to talk a little bit about that. You know, the mornings that are the easiest are, of course, the weekend mornings when I can just, sort of sleep late. And I'm just checking the stream here. Give me just 1 second. I want to make sure that it's actually working. Yeah, okay. Looks like it's live. So what I want to talk about is, and I'm going to assume that there are many people who feel the same way about what the challenge of mornings represent. Now, I did some reading a while ago about the differences in our circadian rhythm. There's a tremendous amount of research, particularly around sleep and how we orient ourselves towards sleep. Some of this research has put people in sensory deprivation living spaces. And what I mean by that is they have no connection to the natural rhythm of the world. These are basically apartments that are like caves underground where people get no clues to when the sun is rising or when the sun is setting, so that scientists could see what our natural biological rhythms could be. They would receive food, for instance, the scientists would manage how they would resupply the people who were living in these spaces so that they weren't fed so that the food wasn't arriving at a regular basis, so that they couldn't coordinate they couldn't get any kind of clues of what the food delivery meant, like milk comes in the morning and the newspaper comes in the evening, or anything like that. And of course the people were not given any kind of newspaper, so they had no idea how much time was passing. And interestingly, one of the things they found is that people actually had natural biological rhythms that were longer. They were about 25 hours, if I'm remembering correctly, that are longer than the natural day. And so people would think that, so that what essentially that means is that they were living, their conceptual experience was they were living longer days. And so they would think that, and they would try and mark off each day of the week. They might end up coming off calendar where they have thought that they lived a full week and it was only 6 days. So, or actually the other way around, where they had lived more than a week, but they thought it was only 6 days, for instance. And so there's this natural order that is not connected to the world around us. Now, compare that to other sleep research that shows that actually our bodies have its own internal clock, where we have certain chemicals that start to relax us and cause us to go to sleep, and that to some extent those are triggered by our connection to sunlight. And those chemicals are blocked by caffeine. Caffeine actually blocks the receptors for this enzyme or hormone, I guess is probably a better word for it. And that's what makes us be able to stay awake when we've had caffeine, is because the receptors that would otherwise be bringing about what the scientists call sleep pressure, that feeling of drowsiness and wanting to fall asleep, which comes from the accumulation of this one hormone or enzyme in the body, is blocked by caffeine. And so we can see, sort of how we can manipulate our experience and our fatigue and our tiredness by chemicals like caffeine. And of course we know that there are any number of drugs, amphetamines, and for instance, and stimulants, which are part of the amphetamine category, that also impact our ability to stay awake. I don't know how their chemical interaction interfaces with our brain chemicals, but we do know that we have a lot of ways to manipulate our moods, our experience, our energy when we go to sleep, when we stay awake. But if we're just living our normal lives, how many of us, like me, have have different circadian rhythms. That was not a very clear sentence. What I'm saying is that we all live with our own internal body clock, and it doesn't take much thinking about the people we know in our lives or have known to know that there are certain people who are larks and there are certain people who are night owls. That's how one book that I read describes it. Larks are people who they are up at the crack of dawn and they are getting stuff done, and they're like the Army had that ad, we get more done before 6 a.m. than most people do all day. Well, that's a lark mentality. I am bright-eyed and bushy-tailed the minute I pop out of bed. Well, that's not me. That's not Mark Rothman, and that may be many of you, and fantastic, because the world needs all of us. The world needs larks, and it also needs people who I think are more like me on the spectrum, are night owls. Sometimes I don't feel like I can really, certainly when I was in college, I didn't feel like I was really warmed up until the afternoon. And that also, by the way, shifts over time, but I don't want to digress over that. Our body rhythms shift. Teenagers, for instance, need tremendous amount of sleep because of the growth that their bodies are experiencing. That's why a teenager can sleep for 12 to 15 hours on a regular basis. And by the way, teenagers are more naturally night owls. So one of the biggest challenges in our educational system is that our education system, I think, is based on the agrarian model. That's why we have long summer vacations, because people needed to go out in the fields and harvest the crops. And on a farm, you need to be up at the crack of dawn to feed the chickens and milk the cows and do all of these things that these animals need, who need care and are dependent on us. They need taken care of. We need to be ready to do that, and the school is kind of oriented along that same calendar. So for teenagers in high school, trying to be in an 8 a.m. or a 9 a.m. class is a tremendous challenge. And so there are some, and this is not novel thinking, I know that there are schools that are already trying to adapt to create cycles that are more in line with the biology of teenagers. I think the truth is, for many teenagers, even if they school start to 8:30 or 9, that's not really, they would be saying no. Start the school at 10 or 11, and that's when I'm just getting warmed up. But there may be a long way to go, but there's an idea that this thinking about the difference between our lark circadian rhythm and our night owl circadian rhythm can be adapted for in setting our high school schedules in particular. But that's just some background on how our circadian rhythms change over time, because as we get older, we tend to need less sleep. It's easier to be up early for many of us as we age, and we see our circadian rhythms switch. As for me, I have no problem getting out of bed. The challenge for me is kind of getting up emotionally, being awake emotionally. And that's why I'm talking about this on my Tuesday Facebook Live, is because I'm going to assume that if I'm experiencing it, many of you watching are experiencing it as well. And so the question becomes not just, can I physically get out of bed, but where am I mentally? I have a little bit of a routine that I do in the morning. It generally involves getting up, taking care of myself, brushing my teeth, going to the bathroom, all the sort of early morning things I need to do, and then doing my exercise first thing in the morning. I want to get it done. I want to get it out of the way. It's just, structurally, it seems to be the better way. I want to compare that to when I was in college. My favorite time to exercise was the afternoon, after my classes and before my dinner, around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And that lasted for a while, into my 20s and maybe into my 30s. And maybe it was when I started having kids and afternoon times were about taking care of kids that I could start scheduling my workouts early in the morning. And that's also, I'm skipping over a long period of time where I actually didn't really get any kind of workout in, because kids are up early and they go to sleep, at 8 or 9, and that pretty much wipes out any workout time. But that's a different story. Fortunately, that's a short-term. When you're going through it, it feels like it's going to be forever, but it's a short-term phase of our lives where our kid care is primary. And I say short-term, I'm talking about 7 to 10 years, not short-term in the measure of the experience, but in terms of a lifetime of talking about somebody from college to childbearing years to middle age and late middle age and senior years. A 7 to 10 span is finite. It's not going to go on forever. But I digress. The point I want to talk about is, how do we get up mentally? How do we get up not just so that our bodies are awake, but that we're physically energized and ready to start the day? And I think the number one challenge for me is my attitude. When I'm first up, particularly if early in the morning, if I'm going to sort of work out by myself, the attitude can be a feeling of like I'm climbing a mountain. I have to get over this kind of emotional mountain where my attitude is not just that I want to go back to bed for the sleep, but I want to go back to bed for kind of the emotional comfort. I think that's the hardest thing that I seem to be experiencing in the morning, is that whatever my circadian rhythm is doing is I'm experiencing a kind of emotional deficit early in the morning. And I'd be really interested to hear how many of you are experiencing the same thing. Please go ahead and comment in the comments below and let me know what your mornings are like psychologically as well as physically. How easy is it for you to go through the motions of getting yourself going? That part's easy for me, but it's the psychological part of building myself up the mountain. And so what I found is that having a lot of time in the morning, giving myself kind of comfort space where I can move slowly, I can get my early morning run in, I can get my breakfast ready, I can have some time to read the newspaper, is a way for me to be gentle to myself, is a way for me to give myself the space that will allow me to get, to sort of energize emotionally. And I think that that's a question, a suggestion I have for many of you, and also a question as well is, what do you do that helps you get over, that sort of early morning challenge? I read in the book The Amateurs by David Halberstam about a group of rowers who were trying to get to, I believe it was the 1984 Olympics. It's an old book. It goes back 30 or 40 years. And in one of the rowers describes how he gets out of bed in the morning to get to the boathouse. Now, rowers typically are some of the larkiest people I know. Even if they're not, their circadian rhythm isn't a lark rhythm, they're going to orient themselves to it so they can do their sport. And it's an interesting question. I'm digressing a little bit. If we were to do a study about whether rowers naturally have a lark circadian rhythm or a night owl circadian rhythm, I want to argue that in college, to a certain extent, all bets are off because, again, teenagers in general are more the night owl kind of personality, and they're going to need a tremendous amount of sleep. So having 19 and 20-year-olds getting up at 5 in the morning to be at the boathouse by 5:30 or 6, it may be counter the biology of the rowers themselves. How that impacts performance, I'm sure someone studied it, but again, major digression. What I'm coming back to is in this book by David Halberstam, The Amateurs, one rower said when he's lying in bed and the alarm goes off and he's thinking, oh crap, I can't get out of bed. He thought to himself, all I need to do is put in one contact lens. I got to get into the bathroom and put in one contact lens. Because he knew that once he got one contact lens in, he'd have to get in the other contact lens. And then he knew once he had two contact lenses in, well, he couldn't go back to bed, so it was time to brush his teeth. And once his teeth were brushed, it was time to get into his rowing gear. And once he was in his rowing gear, he was like, well, what else am I going to do? I guess I better get in the car and get to the boathouse. So we can have these little baby step actions. I'm a big fan of sort of breaking big tasks and hard tasks and challenging tasks down to, these baby steps that are almost impossible not to accomplish. So if you can, maybe that's part of what we need to do each morning is break our day down into like, all I need to do is get into the bathroom and brush my teeth. And once I've got that going, then, at least the train is out of the station. That doesn't necessarily always raise my emotional mood. Frankly, what I find raises my emotional mood the most is some kind of active commitment where I'm getting outside of my own body. So if I have a client meeting first thing in the morning, that may be hard for me to get to, but once I'm in the meeting, I'm totally focused. And of course, after the meeting, I'm energized. Doing these Facebook Lives on Tuesday morning and YouTube Lives is a great way for me to sort of supercharge myself. Now, going back to other ways that we manage our emotional moods and our circadian rhythms, Coffee is something that a lot of people say is, I'm nothing until I've had my first cup of coffee. And what I think they're saying is they need that caffeine kick to kind of jumpstart themselves, not just physically, but maybe, and this is my hypothesis, they're also saying emotionally. That's going to get them over whatever kind of emotional or mental hump they're feeling at the beginning of their day. And again, I'd love to hear your comments on this. How do you get your day started? Are you a lark or are you a night owl? How has that shifted over time? Send me your comments. I will respond. I'd love to be in dialogue. Thank you so much for being with me this morning. You'll be able to see this on my YouTube channel. I have a separate playlist for my Tuesday morning live recordings. And of course, thank you for watching on Facebook as well. And have a great day.